Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Canard Boulevard. Today we're going to be talking about some aerodynamics of the Canard aircraft, and then we're going to talk about some reasons why you do not want to buy one of these airplanes. Coming up. If you saw a video I did a few months ago, it was why did I buy this weird airplane? And I talked about all the reasons why I bought the airplane, but what some of the advantages are about these Canard aircraft and what some of those things are that made me want to buy one. A lot of those are correct that I mentioned, but there were some misconceptions that I mentioned in there that I got flack from Mark Zeitlin, who is the guru of these airplanes. Nice guy, very opinionated, but very, very smart. We had a discussion. He said, you really need to make a clarification video to address some of the misconceptions that, in his opinion, are propagated about Canards in general. So this video is going to be that, and in doing so, I'm going to reveal some things about these airplanes that may mean you don't want to buy or build one, but then maybe you do. So I have written down all this stuff that I've gotten from Mark. I actually sat through a couple of his hour-long online lectures describing a lot of the details of the aerodynamics of these airplanes to make sure that I had everything correct. I'm not going to go into anywhere near the detail that he does. I would highly recommend you look at his videos if you're really interested in the nitty-gritty of the Canard aerodynamics, but I'll try to boil it down to something I could fit in just a few minutes here. All right, I mentioned that Mark Zeitlin was the one who commented on my original video, and what I did is I created this video and put it together, sent it to him and said, hey, what do you think? He wrote back and said, yeah, better. You got a few things wrong. So what I've done is, seeing as I'm back at the airport anyway, I'm getting the airplane ready for a trip that I'm taking tomorrow, I thought I will go over just a few of the things that he mentioned so that when I re-edit this video together, I could take out stuff that was wrong and put in stuff that was right. And that is why you're going to see my clothes switching back and forth. Before, it was a lot warmer. I was wearing a t-shirt. Today, it's about 40 degrees and it's quite cold in here. Okay, first thing I do want to mention is that I'm going to put links to Mark's videos in the description below. So if you do want to see Mark's original presentations where he goes way, way, way more in depth about the aerodynamics of the Canard than I am here, then you can do so and check out those links. And I really recommend you do if you're interested in these airplanes, because he's really the expert when it comes to cozies. People asked about the Vortilons, which are these here, and what these do is prevent span-wise flow when the aircraft is at a higher angle of attack. And the reason why you want to do that is to prevent separation, to prevent stalling of the main wing. These Vortilons are actually in the stagnation area of the wing. There's no actual airflow over these during normal flight in the attitude the wing is at in normal flight. It's only when the wing actually goes into a higher angle of attack where these come into play and prevent the span-wise flow, which you would normally get from this swept wing. And in the first of what is probably going to be many clarifications that I record as I'm editing this video, not only do they prevent span-wise flow, but as the wind span-wise flow hits that at a higher angle of attack, it creates a vortice which then moves across the top of the wing and helps prevent separation, which is how then it prevents the wing from stalling at lower airspeeds and higher angle of attack. So why do we have this swept wing? And it's the same reason airliners have a swept wing, because it has the same effect on lift that a longer aspect ratio does. Okay, that was wrong. Sweeping the wing decreases the aspect ratio, not increase. So it actually causes the wing to become a little bit less efficient. The main reason for the cozy to have its swept wings is to get the vertical stabilizers back far enough that they have some kind of yaw control effect over the airplane. So aspect ratio is the ratio of the length of the wing compared to the chord length of the wing. And if you look at something like a glider that has very, very high aspect ratio wings, they're long and skinny, means they generate a ton of lift. Not quite, it increases the coefficient of lift, so it makes it more efficient at creating lift. It basically steepens the lift curve slope. If you had an infinitely long wing, then you almost get a two-dimensional flat ratio, which in theory would be zero drag. So the longer the wing, the steeper the lift curve slope, the higher the coefficient of lift, and the lower induced drag. So it's all a good thing. And what the higher aspect ratio gives you is more lift for a given angle of attack. The other thing that's good about a swept wing is that it is dynamically or structurally stable. Any twist in the wing that's caused by stress on the aircraft in flight causes it to reduce lift, which then reduces stress. So it's self-correcting, which is that's a benefit of having the swept wing. That was a really piss-poor explanation, so I'm going to try and do it again, showing you on this model what I was trying to say here. I'm going to take the propeller off so it doesn't fall out. So here we have our cozy. So if we look at the wing here, if we generate lift here, it's going to try and twist the wing this way. It's going to try and go this way, but of course if you twist it that way, that means it's going to nose down, it's going to reduce the angle of attack on the main wing, which means it's going to create less lift. So if you encounter wind or control movements or whatever that causes a increase in lift here, which is an increase of stress on the wing, what it naturally wants to do then is actually reduce that so it's dynamically stable. So we're going to talk about lift curve slope, which is the amount of lift given over a certain angle of attack and how it changes as the angle of attack changes and how that is used in the Canard aircraft to make it stable. So if we look at a conventional aircraft like this one here, we have the main wing in front and then we have a tail in the back that provides displacement correction. So if we hit turbulence and it goes down like this, it's going to correct it and bring it back up. Kind of like when you're towing a trailer. It goes out to one side if you hit a bump and then it's going to return back. If we were to be flying this way in this airplane, we'd have the opposite. We'd have negative dynamic stability, and if it got displaced, it would do this. So the way we do this is by creating the airfoil on the tail with a higher lift curve slope, which makes it more efficient than the main wing. So that the same angle of attack, this wing at the back creates more lift, which then brings it back quickly. If it was the opposite and we displaced it, this wing would generate more lift than this one, and the airplane would do this and rip off its wings. So the idea is that as it flies along, it gets displaced. This one lifts quicker than this one, so then it pushes it back and restores stability. So that is lift curve slope and how it's used in dynamic stability in the aircraft. To do that, the front wing must be more heavily loaded than the rear wing, which is fine. We have cockpit, engine, fuel, passengers, and we have almost nothing back here. So you can see it's more heavily loaded at the front and the back. And also we must have the center of gravity ahead of the center of lift. So in a Canard, what we have to do is have the lift curve slope of the rear wing be more efficient than the front wing. We want the front wing to stall first, if you recall. The front wing must also be more heavily loaded. Again, it needs to be stalling first before the main wing. The CG in a Canard aircraft has to be ahead of the center of lift. So if the center of lift is here, we need to make sure that our CG is ahead of that in a Canard aircraft, because otherwise we'd have no load on the Canard wing at all. It would never stall, and this wing would stall. That's bad. And another way we do that is that the Canard has only 15% approximately of the total wing area of the aircraft. However, it's carrying between 25 and 35% of the load of the aircraft, so it's much more heavily loaded. All of this is to make sure that the Canard stalls first before the main wing. Stalling the main wing on the Canard, very bad, not recoverable. Yaw and roll stability in the Canard are interconnected. If you roll it, it's going to yaw, basically, and vice versa. We have swept wings to get our vertical stabilizers back behind the airplane, and that gives us our directional stability, just like our vertical stabilizer here is back behind our center of gravity, our pivot point. That gives us our directional stability, and in order to do that, we need to have swept wings to get those vertical stabilizers that far back. What about winglets? Because these act somewhat like winglets. What does that do for us? A traditional winglet adds to the lift curve slope because it extends the length of the wing, but without adding bending moment because it's actually up at an angle. So we aren't bending it from out here, it's bending it from here. So we get free lift without the added weight and structure of the wing that would be required to have that extra length. If they're designed correctly, it can produce a little bit of extra thrust, simply because you have air rolling out from underneath the wing, and if it hits the winglet correctly and it's shaped correctly, it can then direct that wind backwards and give you just a little bit of thrust. It adds a little bit of efficiency to the wing, reduces drag at the best lift drag speed. So winglets help you. How about on the Cozy though? There's not much in the way of drag reduction on a Cozy. The best lift drag speed in the Cozy is 85 knots. You don't spend a whole lot of time flying around at 85 knots on a Cozy, so for the speeds that we fly at, not really that much of a benefit. So I've made a lot of comparisons about efficiency and speed and capability between the Cozy and other airplanes. Now, if you compare the Cozy to Cessna 172, the Cozy is going to blow it out of the water. You can't compare an airplane that flies at 8 or 9 gallons per hour at 110 knots to a Cozy that is flying at 165 knots at 7.5 gallons per hour. It's far more efficient. But there are many, many differences. Much higher wing loading, no flaps, so you have much higher takeoff and landing speeds, a smaller, narrower cabin. There's a lot of differences, and so we need to do a more like-like comparison. So fuselage size and shape. Are they side by side? Are you sitting straight up like in a Cessna? Are you reclined in like one of these, or like a Lancer or Glasair? That makes a difference because that changes the height of the fuselage if you're reclined, which means more, or rather less frontal surface area, which means less drag. What about the wing size and area? Highly loaded wings, a lot less drag, means higher takeoff and landing speeds, higher stall speeds, but a lot less drag. Less forgiving for instance, a student pilot, however. Is it fixed? Is it retractable? Well, let's compare fixed and retractable airplanes. We have to talk about the engine power. Are we talking about an IO 360? Are we talking about something with an IO 540? And also, is it fixed pitch or constant speed? So airplanes that compare similarly with a lot of those things to the Cozy are like the RV-10, the Lancer 4. Similar sizes, similar engines, similar weights, essentially the same terms of wing loading, so those are good comparisons. The advantage the Cozy has essentially over those aircraft is stall spin resistance. But all said and done, they're very similar in terms of speeds, capability, efficiency, landing speeds, stall speeds, so they're very similar in capabilities. Okay, so if you watched my previous video, I talked a lot about how the main wing generates lift and the canard generates lift. So you have all the wings generating lift all the time, whereas on a conventional airplane, you have lift and downwards lift, which means now this wing has to generate lift to overcome the downward lift of the horizontal stabilizer, and that's true. That is absolutely true. So it's less efficient because you do have to generate extra lift. However, a canard up front is generating lift. And how does it do that? By displacing air mass, by creating a pressure zone underneath, and in doing so, creates downwash that then hits the rear wing here, which means that this section, the streak, and this part of the wing is not as efficient as it could be because it's being blanketed by downwash from the canard. So if that were not the case, if the canard was not there and we were magically getting lift from the canard without having the canard there, then yes, we would have a far more efficient lifting force on this wing because we would have nice clean air coming across here and generating lots of lift. But we don't have that. We have a canard up front generating downwash. If we had the canard that was stuck, maybe 15 feet in the air, then it wouldn't be generating downwash that's affecting this wing. We get that efficiency, but then you have all this structure and whatever it would take to get the canard sticking way up in the air, and it would look ridiculous. And because we now have less efficient lift on the main wing because of that canard downwash, that means we need a larger main wing to generate the sufficient lift for the airplane, which makes it a little bit less efficient because more lift, more wing means more drag. Because the lift profile then is not equal, we have less lift here, more lift here, and then of course you want less lift out at the edge. The ideal lift profile is purely elliptical, where it tapers at the edge, lots in the middle, and then tapers at the other edge. Instead, we have a decrease here, which is not optimal. So again, we need more surface area, more wing in order to compensate for that. Another reason we need a bigger main wing is because we need that stall resistance. We need to have extra wing to make sure that we never reach critical angle of attack on this wing because it's not recoverable. If we didn't have to do that, if we could build this wing just to the size that is required in order for the plane to fly efficiently, it would be much smaller and the plane would fly faster and less drag. But we can't do that because we need to make sure that this wing never stalls. So we need to make sure that it has enough wing that the critical angle of attack, we never get anywhere close to it, that the canard always stalls first. So the downwash effect of the canard plus the additional size to prevent the main wing from stalling first essentially nullifies the gift we get for having two lifting surfaces. And in the wash, the efficiency between this and a conventional airplane of similar size, similar wing loading, similar power, similar everything is essentially the same. Basically, there's no free lunch. So what's bad? Why don't we want to buy this plane? High landing speed. It lands and takes off fast because we don't have flaps. We can't have flaps in this design. So we have a very high takeoff and landing speed, 70 plus knots. People are astounded at the landing speed. You do get used to it, but that means it's fast. You need some runway, and it has to be a hard surface runway. We also have small wheels, and particularly on front where we are actually retracting. And if you're landing at 75 knots with small wheels, they are spinning up fast. You are wearing out tires. You are wearing out brakes. Again, it's a compromise you have to live with. The nose gear, the nose strut on the Canard, on the Cozy and the Long Easy is not a good design. Bert Rutan admits it's not a good design. He wishes he never did a free caster nose wheel. He in fact has, wow, it's pouring rain outside. In fact, he's challenged somebody to come up with a different nose gear design for these airplanes with a steerable nose wheel, and that is a more robust solution because the nose gear in these airplanes is not robust. It suits the purpose, but it definitely could be better. So because the nose gear is small, it reduces the angle of incidence of the main wing, not to mention the canard, which means that you need more speed in order to rotate it off. Plus, if you hit a bump, the angle of the nose gear actually will rotate up, which means the nose dips down. So you need even more airspeed in order to get that up. On a conventional airplane, you have your propeller on the front and you're doing your takeoff run. You've got all this prop wash blowing over your horizontal stabilizer so that when you want to rotate, you can pull the stick back and it pulls the nose up because you've got this prop wash over the tail surfaces. You can force the airplane to rotate the main wing into an angle of attack that it will fly at simply because you have that extra air from the prop. This airplane does not. You do not have prop wash over your canard surfaces. You have only the clean air that the canard is encountering on your takeoff run, which means you have to get up to a higher speed to get the canard to generate enough lift to lift it that will then rotate the main wing to its angle of attack that it will just start generating lift and then take the plane off the ground. If you had prop wash over the canard, you could probably rotate this airplane at 60 knots instead of 70 plus. So you need more runway, but to be fair, all high performance airplanes need a lot of runway. A Lancer or a Lancer 4, it rotates at 70-ish knots. A Lancer 4 rotation speed is not too different from the Cozy. It needs a lot of airspeed to rotate off the runway. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And last thing I'll talk about rotation is if you think about an airplane that rotates, it has the main gear here. So that's the rotation point. It's going to rotate on the gear right there. So all you need to do is generate a little bit of lift that will offset the difference between the main gear and the front of the airplane, and off it goes. Whereas on the Cozy, the main gear is back here, almost at the aft CG, and you have to lift the whole front of the plane. So the pivot is, instead of here, the pivot is back here. So you have a lot more pivot, a lot more lifting that you have to actually do in order to get the airplane off the ground. Okay, talking about that rotation pivot, the main issue is that the airplane, when it's on the ground, is not sitting close to or at the angle of incidence that it would be in order to rotate. Whereas most airplanes, it's really close there. You only have to rotate it just a little bit to get the wing up into an angle of incidence, into a point where it starts making lift and the airplane starts to fly. Whereas a canard, you have to get the canard up and then continue lifting in order to get the main wing into its angle of incidence enough that it starts generating lift, and then the airplane starts to fly. The problem is pilot over-controlling, or PIO, pilot-induced oscillation. What happens is you're pulling back on the stick to get the canard up, and you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and then it comes up, and then the main wing starts to fly, and up it comes, and you still got all this back pressure in, and the airplane wants to point to the sky. And so you let down, but now the canard's going down, and you pull back up, and now you got some PIO happening. So that's really just transition training. Some people seem to be really afraid of that. I think I got that within the first 2 takeoffs, and it was really not an issue for me. It's just a question of feel. You feel when the canard's coming up, you feel when the main wing starts to fly, and you just ease off a little bit on the back pressure on the stick to make sure that you are not over-controlling, and just basically listen to the airplane and feel what it's doing and just respond appropriately. So that's basically what I think Mark wanted me to convey in terms of the aerodynamics of the Canard and the Cozy in particular. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, and corrections, especially corrections, I really appreciate it, especially on technical videos like this one, please leave them in the comments section below. If you do like videos like this, please click like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. It really helps me out. All right, I hope this rain isn't too loud and hasn't destroyed this video. It's really loud in here. Thanks for watching.